Hey guys, this is an updated Prapor task guide for the Punisher Part 4. For this task, we do have to eliminate 10 scavs while using any 12-gauge shotgun on Lighthouse, as well as eliminate 10 PMCs while wearing any Balaclava and also a Scav vest on Lighthouse. And then lastly, you do have to find 5 of the brown-handled knives in raid and then hand them over to Prapor. So this task was updated and now the kills do have to be done on Lighthouse rather than Shoreline, and I never thought that I would say I miss a task being on Shoreline. However, this task has been an absolute pain locker for me the last 2 wipes. And it definitely seems like it does take a lot longer now to complete this task than it used to on the old map. Now, I think that I do speak for most people when I say that Lighthouse is in serious need of some changes similar to the recent Shoreline facelift, because how the map is currently, it just really doesn't seem to flow or play well for many different reasons. But when you are looking at this task as a whole, the majority of the issues are the PMC spawns and also not being able to actually find players if you do end up getting a bad spawn, and also the inconsistency and lack of AI scav spawns. And instead of the AI scav spawns, you instead get literal swarms of player scavs that spawn in also way too early, and then they continue throughout the entirety of the raid. So for those of you who are struggling with the PvP portion of this task, and then you came to this guide to try and figure out how to consistently find PvP on this map, my no bullshit quick and dirty advice is to push PMC spawns immediately, and then you want to force the PvP in that way. And then essentially you can just go and reset and do it over and over again. Now, if you don't know the spawns, you can pause my video from here and then the map will be on the screen with the PMC spawns on it, or you can also use any other online map that you can see PMC spawns on it as well. And then my other advice is to essentially be aggressive and push shots away from the water treatment plant. You want to be a little bit more cautious and not just aggressively push into the water treatment plant, because it does only take one rogue to put you down very quickly. So in my opinion, you do want to prioritize shots that are outside the water treatment plant and then push those PMCs. Now you can also learn any of the tasks on Lighthouse, especially some of the initial ones, and then you can also try to move into high traffic areas that you know people will be going to. But to clarify, I am not condoning or suggesting that you guys rat or pitch a tent up at choke points, and definitely not at task locations, since that is definitely not going to help you get better at the game. But I also know that some of you will do it and that you were going to do it regardless. But I just want to emphasize that that is not what I'm telling you guys to do, but you guys are going to do whatever you want to do anyway. Now, when you initially unlock this task, then one method is that you can go into raid with just a shotgun to try and get your scav kills out of the way. And then if you do run into any PMCs and you happen to get a kill on them, then it will also count towards your PMC kills, provided that you have on the Balaclava and the Scav vest. Or your other option is that you can prioritize the PMC kills first, since that will likely take you the longest out of everything here. Or you can always just bring in 2 weapons, with one being a shotgun and then one being a longer range, more versatile gun, just in case you actually run into a PMC on the map. Now, just remember that the 2-gun method will definitely pose a higher risk, because if you do die, then you will end up losing 2 weapons instead of 1. But if you do have a lack of space in your stash and you don't have any issues making back rubles, then the risk may be worth it. Now, as for the shotgun, I will tend to run one of the semi-automatic shotguns, being the MP153 or the MP155. And for the ammo that I would use in it, it would be the 50 BMG or the AP20 slugs if I am only bringing the shotgun itself, so that I can be somewhat effective at a bit more of a distance against any scavs or PMCs that I run into. And I will usually put a small scope on the shotty just to give me a bit more magnification, and usually a suppressor, but the build will come down to personal preference as well. The only thing that I do make sure is to use at least a 6-shell cartridge on a semi-auto shotgun, so that I do have the ability to spam it if I do get into a situation. Or I will also use the flechettes as a multi-pellet shell, since it will put down enemies quickly in my experience. But at the end of the day, everybody does always have a preference as to what shotgun slug or multi-pellet shell that they do use, so whatever you are comfortable with and whatever you do have available will work just fine. Just make sure to check the limitations of your shells first before loading into a raid, like the penetration and also the damage, just so that you're not left wondering why it's not being effective for you. Now, with that being said, if I do bring in a secondary gun to handle any fights at a distance, then I will prefer to use Flechette, Piranha, or Magnum Buck for the shotgun, and that way I can get up close to handle the targets, whether they're AI scavs, player scavs, or PMCs. Now, when you are focusing on the PvP part of this task, then you can use any weapon that you are comfortable with, as long as you are wearing one of the vests as well as a Balaclava. So if you did want to run something close range like a shotgun, MP7 Vector, MCX, or even maybe something with flesh ammo that you did want to try to leg somebody with, then I would try to keep your PMC engagements inside or immediately around the blue or the brown chalets. Or if you did intend to keep your fights at longer distances, then you could always bring in literally anything that you have good ammo for that will put a PMC down quickly. But some weapons that have been effective for me this wipe and also the past wipe has been the AUG, the M4, the 7.62x51 caliber weapons like the SA58, Black MDR, RSAS, or even a budget gun for this caliber would be the RFB. And another thing to keep in mind is that you can also look at other PMC elimination tasks that you do have, whether they are going to be dailies or weeklies or something like Shooter Born in Heaven, and then you could potentially try to double dip with those tasks as well. And obviously going for something like Shooter Born in Heaven is going to put yourself at a big disadvantage since running a bolty can hinder you quite badly. So just make sure to choose whatever gun that you do bring in at your own risk, and then also adjust your playstyle based upon what you do bring in. But because people do tend to come to Lighthouse fairly well kitted to take on rogues, then I would recommend bringing some of your actual good ammo, and I do have a chart on the screen which is some of the top tier ammo that's a mixture of damage and also pen that can deal with PMCs geared with level 4, 5, and 6 armor. Now another thing that I would recommend is to actually bring a weapon with a scope on it, since majority of your engagements can be mid to long range unless you are planning to chill in the upper brown chalet for majority of the raid. And another option, and one that I do consider myself when going to Lighthouse, is one of the only times that I do strongly suggest bringing in a thermal if you do have them at your disposal, since there is so many places for people to tuck away and watch you from a distance. And it will just allow you to clear so many different bushes, and then also the top of mountains and just a whole bunch of hidey holes that basically will allow you to move across the map a little bit faster and more safely. But it will be totally up to you guys to decide on what you are comfortable with running and also willing to run. Now, as for the best ways of getting PMC kills for this task, firstly, when you do have the task active, anytime that you load into Lighthouse, I recommend that you always wear the items that are required by the task, because you do never know when you may end up with a big raid and get a bunch of PMC kills, and it does absolutely suck to get a kill that won't count towards the task. So always make sure that you are wearing a Balaclava and also a Scav vest, or you can also use a security vest as a substitute for the Scav vest, which is oftentimes going to be a cheaper option for you. Or there is also a level 1 Ragman barter for a Scav vest, which is going to be for 1 Slicker's chocolate bar, and this can be another way to save yourself some money while doing this task. Now, as for the other gear that you can use any armor or helmet or headset that you do want to, and as mentioned earlier, you can use any gun for the PMC kills, and you can mod it in whichever way that you do prefer. And I also recommend that you do bring in at least 1 grenade with you, since kills with grenades will count towards this task as well. Now, before your PMC is deployed into a Lighthouse raid, you should have a plan or at least a preference as to how you do want the raid to go. For example, if you did bring in a close range weapon and your comfort level is going to be close range, then you should plan to rush into the brown or blue chalet and then remain at or in between the chalet areas for the initial part of the raids, or until you do start getting swarmed by player scavs. This way you can keep your PvP engagements at close quarters, and then you can also bring a weapon that excels in that situation, like an MP7, MPX, or Vector, or if you did prefer more versatility and prefer the mid to long range engagements, then you could bring something with a scope to be able to engage people more accurately from a distance. So something like the Black MDR and RSAS and M4 or the RD could definitely be good options for you. And if you were going to bring something like that, then I would remain outside and around the actual chalets instead of going inside of them. But depending on what you do have in your stash, you could really make anything work, but I would probably prioritize whatever I currently had the best bullets for. That way you can make short work of anyone that you do run into. Now you could also run a 5.45 weapon as well, but with the slower bullet velocity and also worse damage fall off, it can be very frustrating and also a pain to use on this map, since it will seem like whenever you do run a 5.45 or close range weapon, you're basically going to see everybody at a distance, but then once you bring in, say, an RSAS with a scope and a long barrel, then you'll run into all CQC engagements, or at least that's what seems to be my luck. Now, if you did want to try to knock this task out as soon as possible and get off of Lighthouse, then I would recommend focusing on your PMC kills, because that is what's going to hold majority of the people back the longest for this task. And the absolute best way that I've found to consistently run into players and PvP is to learn where the PMC spawns are on the map. And then essentially once you load in, then you want to rush towards the closest spawn. Or at least you do want to put pressure on those areas where they will likely be rotating to. Now, if you don't know where the PMC spawns already are, then you could use a second monitor with a map that does allow you to filter things like the PMC spawn locations, for example, Map Genie. And obviously I will have something like that up on the screen right now, so you can feel free to pause it and then look at where the PMC spawns are located. And then the reason for this is going to be because knowing the spawns gives you an advantage, or at least an awareness that you can anticipate running into another PMC in that area. And even though the other players can be unpredictable on how they maneuver across a map, beginning of a raid is really the only time that you do have an idea that a PMC could definitely be there, especially with how Lighthouse is laid out, being essentially a larger scale Call of Duty 3-lane map that can have up to 12 PMCs spawning in. And since there is going to be no spawns inside or directly around the water treatment plant, that means that you essentially cut off spawns to 1/4 of the map right off the start. So this map in particular, you can have some fairly condensed spawns where you can and sometimes will run into another PMC within the first 2 minutes if you do push towards them. And what I ended up doing to expedite this task was I ended up pushing to the closest spawn that was adjacent to me, and if I didn't find anyone there, then I could either push any gunshots that I heard while I was looking at this particular spawn, or I could push up to the chalets or just reset and then try to run it back. Now I know that some of you guys think that this method is corny as hell or just basically unfair to abuse a poorly designed spawn system on a poorly designed map. So for those of you guys with morals, then I will also mention the typical PMC hotspots so that you people that have morals and don't want to abuse this spawn knowledge will have other ways that you can get your kills. But just know that people will use this against you, so just keep that info in the back of your mind. So even though if you don't abuse it, then you can also defend against it, and then that way you won't be killed 2 minutes out of your spawn. Now, once the raid has developed or extended a little bit, basically all the mid to late raid PMC hotspots are going to be on one side of the map because there are no extractions on the Pride Rock and water side. So usually the only time that you will find players past Pride Rock and along the beach will be at the beginning of a raid if they did spawn over there, or if they are coming back from checking the Marin car or doing a subtask for Seaside Vacation or Cargo X Part 4. Now I will mention that Pride Rock did used to be a great place to pick people off, however it seems that for the most part people have finally learned that it's a terrible idea to go up there, so you will hardly ever see any PMCs go up there now, but I will still check periodically throughout a raid just in case a wild Timmy wanders up there to take a look around. But honestly, your best bet will be rushing to the Upper Brown Chalet, where I do find majority of the PMCs will be trying to head there off spawn in order to check for the valuable loot spawns for Vertexes, Cough Doms, and Mule Stims. Now you can find players down at the Blue Chalet as well, but I've actually had a lot more luck running into players at the rock area in between the two chalets, and I've probably had the most PvP up in the mountains just above the Blue Chalet, last wipe and this wipe as well. And the reason for that is because this is kind of the main rotation path for a lot of players to go towards the path to Shoreline Extract, or even to head towards the water treatment plant from the opposite side of the map. And obviously at the middle to late stages of a raid, then you can find PMCs in the water treatment plant, but also an entire army of player scavs. So I would say that these are definitely going to be your best options. And if you are lucky enough to have found or bought a Red Rebel, then a tip is to actually bring the Red Rebel in with you on Lighthouse and also a Paracord, so that this way you do have the option to just go and extract from the Mountain Pass Red Rebel extract. This way, if you did end up getting into a war at one of these chalets and you are overweight or just really injured, then you can just extract quickly from here instead of having to go to Path to Shoreline or the Southern Road extract. Now, another thing that I'll mention is that the village by Path to Shoreline does have PMCs looting the Hillside House and also the Brick House, but primarily people will be using this area as a cut through to get to the Path to Shoreline extract or to make their way towards the water treatment plant. So you will oftentimes see PMCs crossing over the bridge from the village past the cabin area, where you do have to go to pick up Jaeger's note for the hermit. So you could potentially pick people off while they are trying to cross over this area of the map. And as for the brown handled knives, then you can go and do this from any map, but essentially you do want to check any dead scavs that you come across on your PMC or scav, or you can also run your own scav hoping that they do spawn in with one. And then lastly, since the addition of VoIP, then you can always try to trade with other player scavs, and sometimes people will drop the items for you or wheel and deal with you. So just make sure to keep that in mind. So hopefully you guys found this guide useful and it does help you to complete this task. Thank you guys for watching my video on this, and hopefully you have a fantastic rest of your day.